On August the 24th, 2005, a tropical storm forms over the Bahamas. 5 days later, it will leave the city of New Orleans in ruins.
Everything was gone within a flickering of an eye.
A chain of natural events and human error will conspire to make Katrina the world's most expensive hurricane.
New Orleans is a city surrounded by water. 300 years ago, it was just a small settlement on the bank of the Mississippi River, high above sea level. But over time, it's expanded out into marshlands, and people now live below sea level in much of New Orleans.
With large sections of the city below the waterline, people here are particularly vulnerable to hurricanes. Because it's not just the high winds that make these weather systems so dangerous, but the body of water that's pushed before them, known as a storm surge. Many hurricane deaths are the result of drowning. On the 24th of August 2005, the National Hurricane Center is tracking the tropical storm that will become Katrina.
Katrina first formed, it was nothing really unusual. It was pretty much like any other tropical system at that point.
The storm soon intensifies to a Category 1 hurricane.
So our demeanor at that point was to treat it like a normal hurricane that we've seen many times before.
Like all hurricanes, Katrina forms as rising warm air from the sea creates strong winds and thick clouds full of moisture. Fueled by the unusually warm seas of the Gulf of Mexico, Katrina quickly grows into a much bigger and more powerful hurricane. Back at the weather center, Katrina looms large on the screens.
The satellite imagery revealed a huge eye. It became apparent that we were dealing with a Category 5 hurricane at this point.
The data shows Katrina will strike New Orleans in less than 24 hours.
We had to start issuing our watches and warnings and statements.
Every person is hereby ordered to immediately evacuate.
Those that can get out of town. 1 million people flee the city. But many people simply can't afford to leave. Stanley and Betty Stewart live in the lower 9th Ward.
The decision was made that we weren't going to be able to go anywhere under the financial conditions, and we elect to just stay and pray and hope for the best.
So it ended up being 13 of us in the 2 rooms, basically. All of us know we hunker down.
Up to 100,000 people are left behind to face whatever nature has to throw at them.
We padded our back door with some towels to just keep the water from actually seeping on in.
With a long history of hurricane strikes, New Orleans is surrounded by 560 kilometers of protective levees.
A levee is just made of combinations of clay and sand. The big problem came with all these miles of levee, that some levees were high and some levees were low, some were sinking.
Worse still, the levees were not built to withstand a hurricane of Katrina's intensity. The 29th of August, 6:10 a.m. Hurricane Katrina strikes land with wind speeds of 210 kilometers per hour. With waves up to 8 meters high, the largest storm surge in American history pummels the Gulf Coast. New Orleans is inundated with water.
You could actually hear the waves coming over the roof of the home.
Those stranded have little idea what to do.
Don't panic. Keep these children down.
My brother, looked at me. I said, man, we just really need to pray. I say, because visually, it actually looked like it was going to be your last day on earth.
2 p.m., and the residents of the lower 9th Ward are in serious trouble.
We got major flooding here. Lots of problems here, lots of problems.
Some people were actually, by that time, in 20 feet of water. Some of our friends that were in homes, they had loss of life.
The 30th of August. The hurricane has blown itself out. All the main communication lines are down.
Just trying to figure out, are we the only people left, or is there anybody else around?
With most of New Orleans underwater, the emergency services are left floundering.
They finally said on the radio, you've got to realize that the levee on the 17th Street Canal broke and there's water to the roofs of the houses in Lakeview. I can tell you my life changed right at that point. Everybody didn't realize that this was a new ball game now, that now the city was flooding.
Chris and his colleagues face a disaster of epic proportions.
Everywhere you went, you saw bodies floating. They didn't have enough coroners to come pick up the bodies.
The survivors are corralled into the New Orleans Superdome and Convention Center.
The conditions that was at the convention center was unbearable. People were thinking that they were going to go to a lit shelter where maybe there would have been food or clothing or water. It was nothing. And people were literally just abandoned out on the streets.
With over 46,000 people, some are left with little option but to fend for themselves.
People were dying for lack of resources. We were like, oh my goodness, is this the end of the earth? Is this the end of life?
The failure by the authorities to deal with the rescue and evacuation of so many compounds the disaster.
The big thing that caught people off guard was the floodwaters. Nobody expected 80% of the city to be underwater.
Almost a decade later, 1 in 5 of the population still hasn't returned. And large sections of the city lie in ruins.
I'm currently driving through the lower 9th Ward here, one of the areas that was hardest hit from Hurricane Katrina. And most of the houses here, people didn't come back to. They just abandoned them or just left them here to rot. And it's sort of sad because a neighborhood is gone. It's going to take a generation or more to rebuild this area.
2 weeks after Katrina swamped New Orleans, President George Bush apologizes for the administration's failure to deal with the aftermath.
Katrina exposed serious problems in our response capability at all levels of government. And to the extent that the federal government didn't fully do its job right, I take responsibility.
Certainly, Hurricane Katrina was a natural disaster, but that natural disaster was compounded by the effects of man. The fact that Katrina happened was a wake-up call. Now, the levees are built a little higher, maybe a little stronger. But this disaster can happen. In fact, it will happen again.